night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. So as we've been discussing over the last couple of days, Speaker Mike Johnson said about Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil at Columbia University, quote, "If you are here on a student visa who is an aspiring young terrorist who wants to prey upon your Jewish classmates, you're going home." Well, yesterday, nearly 100 people were arrested after protesters gathered at Trump Tower in Manhattan to denounce the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil. The protest was organized by who? Jewish Voices for Peace and Not in Our Name. And they were saying, Jews stop arming Israel. Why is Speaker Mike Johnson and President Trump lying to the American people? The Trump administration is trying to deport American legal resident Mahmoud Khalil. Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is U.S., Iran, Israeli tensions. What's the path forward? My guest is an international geopolitical consultant, global speaker, author, veteran, former international security analyst in Washington, D.C. He's the founder of Global Perspective Consulting, which is headquartered in Dallas, Texas, and he's the host of the Geopolitical Trends podcast, Dr. David Oualaalou. David, welcome back.
Pleasure to be with you, Wilmer.
So, U.S., Iran, Israeli tensions. I wanted to start the discussion with this related domestic issue. As I mentioned in the open, Speaker Mike Johnson says he's protecting the sensitivities of Jewish students. Trump says he's fighting anti-Semitism, but members of Jewish Voices for Peace and Not in Our Name are getting arrested for supporting Mr. Khalil. There seems to be a real disconnect here, David.
Well, it is indeed, Wilmer, when you consider that is one of our fundamental rights regarding demonstrations, protests, non-violent, of course, but above all, it will be the expression of the freedom of expression, that is. So demonstrations are part of our way of life if we want to demonstrate because we don't like something. But for the government, the Trump administration to go and clamp on something like this, that's going to just set precedents and pave the way for even more abuses. But here is what most Americans do not know, that the Trump administration has already sent about $18 billion to Israel. I just found out this morning that MIT is involving now in producing, shall we say, some special type of drones that's going to be used in targeting defenseless civilians. So to me, it's very, very sort of problematic, to say the least, as an American. I shouldn't be sort of experiencing this kind of approach from the government. But for Mike Johnson to say what he said, for President Trump to say what he said, we all know who is dictating the policies in Washington. I worked in Washington, and we are aware of the very influence of the Jewish lobby there.
And even as recently as right now, Colombia is taking action against students who participated in pro-Palestinian protests last spring. And the school has suspended and expelled students who participated in occupying some of the buildings. The Trump administration has pulled an estimated $400 million of federal grants from Colombia, saying that it failed to fight anti-Semitism on campus. When did it, and I don't ask this question to advocate anti-Semitism, but this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism and everything to do with anti-Zionism. But when did it become the American government's responsibility to fight Semitism?
Well, indeed, Wilmer. I mean, it's very, very troubling when you consider even what the Vice President J.D. Vance said to the Europeans during the Munich Security Summit. Or conference, rather, that is, that you, meaning Europeans, are clamping down on the basic principles of democracy and so forth. And here we are, we're doing the same. So we can't be saying one thing and doing the opposite. That's what it's called hypocrisy. But beside that is when you start dictating to institutions. I mean, we all understand where this is headed. And once again, it's because who is pushing the agenda from behind the scenes. And that's something most Americans do not understand. Personally, it really bothers me, Wilmer, that I'm witnessing this. Yes, we witnessed something similar to this with the previous administration, but on a different level regarding, what we can say and not say and all that. We all know how it is. And if you ask me 25 years ago, will you ever see this in America? I'll tell you, no, you must be wrong, or you're not thinking straight. But here we are. And that's a sad stage where we are in our country.
An even broader view of this is an overall attack on academia. You've taught at the college level. I teach at the college level. We know that those classrooms, in terms of ideology and thought, this is where you're supposed to challenge the dominant narrative. This is where you're supposed to engage in constructive dialogue and argument and the Socratic method. That's how you're supposed to learn. And there now seems to be this direct attack on academia.
Well, indeed, I experienced one. If I may share this with your audience, there, when I used to teach at one of the institutions there, and they didn't like the method by which I was teaching. Well, Dr. O, you can consider this and that. I said, no, I won't. I won't, because I am here to challenge the intellectual capabilities of the students. Who's going to become the next leaders? That's the next generation. I am not here to pat their shoulders. I am not here to cater to them. I am not here to babysit them. I'm here to challenge them, see what they are made of. Because that seat they are taking, someone else couldn't afford it, and he or she deserves it better. And I said, if this is going to continue, I resign immediately. And they thought I was bluffing, and I did. And this is one of the big problems in our education system, Wilmer. You know this as much as any one of us, that once you start to go this direction, you have now to be careful about what you say, because you're going to hurt the sensitivities of the students. Well, wait a minute. Are you going to be worrying about how the students think versus how they feel? Where is this education comes from? That's going to be a problem for me. So I made the decision personally to withdraw myself from teaching in any U.S. academic institutions. And I am considering teaching overseas in some other locations where there is still that respect for education and still that desire for wanting to learn.
And for encouraging critical analysis.
Indeed.
Critical analysis. Stromboli, the Pope of Hope, thank you for your $5 super sticker. Zionism uses fear and propaganda to blur the lines for the American people. There's a lot of validity in that statement. Now to the broader issue. The UN Commission accuses Israel of measures, quote, intended to prevent births and other genocidal acts in Gaza. A report this past Wednesday, released by the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied territory, including East Jerusalem, says that Israel has systematically used reproductive, sexual, and other forms of gender-based violence against Palestinians since October of 2023. And all of this, David, while the U.S. has given Israel and Hamas a new proposal for a temporary ceasefire deal for Gaza. What's going on?
Well, one of the first things that your audience needs to know is that Israel has its own agents inside the U.S. government. That's the norm. And this is why it was Israel that lifted the lid on the secret talks between the U.S. and Hamas. Even though you and I know that the U.S. policy, U.S. government policies, that they will never negotiate with so-called terrorists. No, it doesn't matter how you view Hamas, either freedom fighters or terrorists. Beside the point, Hamas is a part of the fabric of the Palestinian society, whether we like it or not. And we look at now, after all this time, after 7 October and the fights and all that, Hamas still standing. So the idea that Israel is going to go this route, it's because they are concerned, very concerned, that Donald Trump might reach a deal with Hamas. As you notice, and I am sure your audience know this, that Donald Trump reversed his stand on expelling the Palestinians or the people from Gaza. That you don't hear about it anymore. Well, also we know how Trump is. Trump tends to inflate whatever, then at the end he will backtrack whatever he said. Look at it with the tariffs on Canada. Even though they still stand, he went back on the tariffs regarding the automobile industry, Mexico, China, and so forth. So the idea of Israel now is seeing, what if this works out? We're going to have to undermine this by any means. And that is one of the routes Israel wants to go, is using starvation, which is, a war crime, in my opinion, and the opinion of many other scholars, that the U.S. administration is going to be now walking a tightrope as to, okay, do we still have to cater to Israel because we might have no choice into that, or do we cut a deal with Hamas and wrap up this conflict?
Well, I can say very clearly, again, in my international law class, right now, we've just been studying the Nuremberg trial, and collective punishment is a war crime.
Is a war crime, indeed.
A crime against humanity. Yeah. But so you just mentioned two very important things. You mentioned Donald Trump backtracking on this, expelling the Palestinians from their homeland, Palestine. And then you also talked about his tariff inconsistencies. What signals do these inconsistencies send to you? Because I've been saying to a whole lot of folks, one of the problems with Donald Trump is he's so unpredictable because he has no guiding ideology. Whether you agree with an ideology or don't agree with an ideology, at least understanding one enables you to figure out how to deal with the person that you're engaged with. But he's so transactional that it's almost what they say, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Yeah. Well, before I answer this one, Wilmer, if you allow me, just to add one more thing about the previous theme regarding Israel. I got a word that the prime minister is going to be going to Hungary. And it makes me wonder, will the ICC arrest warrant stand? Because as of today, I don't know if you're aware of it, that the former president of Philippines, Duterte, is in the ICC custody. So it makes me just wonder about this double standards. So
yeah, they
I'm going to be
they arrested Duterte about 2 days ago. He was in Hong Kong.
in Hong Kong. That's correct.
Right.
Makes me just wonder about the double standards. So I'm going to keep my eyes open about this. So to go back to your recent last statements about Donald Trump double standard, not double standard, but rather no ideology, no policy whatsoever. It's because, like you articulated, that Trump is transactional. So he's going to be thinking in terms of, well, I can deal with geopolitical matters in a transactional way. And that doesn't work, and it will not work, and it will not bode well for any country. Consider, for example, what we are going through right now. With these tariffs that Mr. Trump imposing on other countries. China already hit back hard regarding the agricultural products.
Mm-hmm.
Canada is hitting back hard too, with now removing all the U.S. liquors and all that. But even having the Ottawa provincial governor, whatever term they use over there, the premier, threatening to cut off electricity on upstate New York and Washington State and so on. All this makes you wonder, and I am sure, I wish, or I hope most Americans will just ask themselves, why is the administration pushing the U.S. into a recession? Well, the answer is simple. It's because if we fall into recession, or when we fall into recession, because we are going that direction, it's going to become now the green light for Congress to save the economy no matter what. How it's going to save the economy? Printing more money. I'll take your audience back to 2008 with the GFC, the global financial crisis. The trend we are witnessing right now, Wilmer, were the same trends we were witnessing about 3 weeks prior to the GFC. And of course, what we did back then is we could let the big banks fail. That tells you the story right there, who controls the decisions. We're going to be seeing the same over here as far as how the special interest groups, the entities, be they the financial or otherwise, including the Federal Reserve, which there is nothing federal about, is going to be controlling the narrative and the direction where things are. So when Trump decides on tariffs here and there, he's just trying to play bully, if I may. Do I disagree with everything? No. For example, because we got to give credit where credit is due.
Sure.
And we're going to give criticism when criticism is warranted. For example, India was imposing high tariffs on U.S. products. Why will India be imposing all this and getting a better deal from our end? So he threatened them. They backed down immediately. Of course, because India is not strong enough. They can't stand to Mr. Trump, so they back down. Canada is a different story. Because Mr. Trump was thinking, oh, I'm going to just bully my way, and Justin Trudeau is going to back down. Well, Justin Trudeau doesn't care because he's leaving office. But on the other hand, he will send the message to the Americans from the Canadian side that, no, we are not going to tolerate this bullying. That's why Donald Trump went back on certain tariffs, because he didn't anticipate or expected the swift resolve and response from both from all three countries, Canada, China, and Mexico.
One of the things that stands out to me about this tariff regime is and Kevin Baptist, thank you so much. Teach and preach, Dr. O. Well, that's what he does. Thank you, Kevin. The states that are dramatically impacted by a lot of these tariffs, you mentioned Bourbon, that's Kentucky, predominantly a red state. When you look at the soybeans that were going to China, and the poultry and the pork, a lot of those products, those agricultural products, corn products, come from the Midwest, red states. When you look at the impact of the tariffs on on steel and the Ford F-150 truck, a lot of those vehicles are bought in red states. The gasoline that's now the price is gonna go up. A lot of that energy from Canada goes to red states. So there are an awful lot of people that voted for Donald Trump that are now scratching their heads and going to these town halls screaming at their representatives, what are you guys doing to us?
And this one, Wilmer, it's going to be evident during the upcoming midterm elections. So I've already had some conversations that there's already concerns within the Republican file that Trump's policies might end up doing more harm, not about beside the economy. It's about the political direction of the party. And we might see where the problem that I see. The problem is the system is controlled by only those two parties. So you have no third option here.
Right.
And that's, to me, problematic, because if we were to say we are in a democracy, allow people choices, allow people to decide, even if you have 10 parties, whoever gets the votes, that's what's going to be. But when you're limiting the options only to two, you're either this or that, and both two faces of the same coin, because we end up dealing with the same outcome. It's just changing the name, basically.
And, for me, and I wrote a piece a while ago called The Dangers of Binary Politics for the African-American community. The fact that the Democrats, you said give credit where credit is due. I heard Minority Leader Jeffries today. I have to give him a lot of credit on this one, because he was very clear. He was very forceful, challenging Chuck Schumer. When Chuck Schumer said a couple of days ago, under no circumstances would he vote for the continuing resolution. And Hakeem Jeffries was able to keep the Democrats in line in the House. Then Chuck Schumer flips on the whole deal, and Hakeem Jeffries was very clear today about how Chuck Schumer has bailed on the Democrats. But with that being said, one of the big problems that I see is that the Democrats aren't offering anything to anybody. They still seem to be lost and confused. It's one thing to say that Donald Trump is an idiot and the bill that's being put before the American people is going to damage the economy and all. That's true. But what are the Democrats offering? And that's what I think is still going to do them such damage in the long run, because they're not really saying anything to anybody.
Well, for sure. You're going to look at that from two angles. One is domestic and one is overseas, like a foreign or from an international level. If you look at the domestic policies regarding the economy, regarding so many other aspects, we went through what we went through with the Democrats, and was the economy any better than it is today? The answer is no. In my opinion, someone else might disagree with me, and I respect their opinion, and they are entitled to this, because that's, to me, in disagreements where great ideas emerge. They don't have to agree. But if we are to think in terms of the policies, from when it comes down to a foreign policy, for example, what the fiasco of the Ukraine thing was promoted by the Democrats. Let's just be straightforward about it. Of course, the issue didn't start 4 years ago. People will have to understand that this issue goes way back to 2004, and it emerged strongly in 2007, and he made the ground in 2014. That's the evolution of the conflict. The bottom line is,
the Ukraine conflict?
Yes.
You can go all the way back to 1990.
90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union. Right. I just wanted for those who were born after the 90s to make it easier for. So the idea, no, that tells you how old I am, Wilmer.
How old we are.
So on a serious note, just we think about, to go back to the last 4 years, and I'm looking at the expenditure that has been sent to Ukraine, which, by the way, that money never made it there. To my knowledge, it was only about 600 billion rather, and he was waiting on 100 billion, and it didn't make it there, even though it was more than that, over $300 billion. The point is not that. The point is, when you look at both parties, you look at now with the Trump administration, what is things they are advocating for now? the things that they are pushing for is a war with Iran. Why will we need a war with Iran? In other words, another conflict in the Middle East. Haven't we have enough? When our infrastructure is crumbling before our own eyes, when the education system is crumbling, when the health system is costly beyond imagination, when people are now worried whether they're going to afford the basic things, where even retirees people are wondering, will I have enough to live on? And if we are saying we are the wealthiest and richest nation on earth, and yet your citizens are struggling, that's to me problematic. And I don't blame one party or another. Of course, it's the system, but it's the two parties that take it upon themselves to represent the people, but they are no sort of, as it says in the Constitution, the government for the people, by the people, because we never hold those representatives accountable. That is why things are going a different direction. I am now concerned, as one who deals with geopolitical aspects, I am concerned as to the direction where what Trump is pushing regarding the Iran nuclear file, the JCPOA. And knowing what I know, unfortunately, I can't disclose certain sensitive information here. It just doesn't, it's not going to bode well if we go that direction of a military confrontation.
In fact, let me get to that next issue after I make this point to Zhao Yun. Zhao says, sure, the Dems are not offering anything right now, but does that mean we should accept what the Repubs are offering? No, that's not the point. The point that I'm making is there's an awful lot of Trump hysteria. And there's an awful lot of analysis and there's an awful lot of attention focused on Donald Trump, and rightfully so. But you also have to look at the other side of the aisle and the fact that the Democrats are telling us what we already know. No. And they're not offering anything new. And with that tells me they're following the same path they followed in the election, which is one of the major reasons why Kamala Harris lost. So what that tells me is if you follow the same failed program you followed in 2024, which, by the way, was Hillary Clinton's failed program in 2016, you're going to fail again. Zhao, that's the point. Now, with that having been, anything, David, on that?
No, I just want to say thank you, Zhao and Kevin. Those are my avid supporters.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You know, thank you guys for being here.
You just mentioned Iran. Iran's president says to Trump, I will not negotiate. Do whatever the hell you want. President Masoud Pezeshkian said Iran would not negotiate with the U.S. while being threatened, telling Trump, do whatever the hell you want. Iranian state media reported it's unacceptable for us that the U.S. gives orders and makes threats. I won't negotiate with you. They are and have been for a very long time playing with fire, Dr. Oualaalou.
Well, that's a very complicated issue regarding the Iran file. But at the same time, I remember I wrote a book about Iran and I detailed in it what the possibilities of the outcome if the JCPOA doesn't hold. Something prompted me back then when I wrote the book in 2018-19, prompted me that there might be that possibility. Why? It's because our administrations change every 4 years or 8 years or what have you. So things could change. So, to go back to the original issue with this, why Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei decided not to negotiate with the U.S. As a matter of fact, the foreign minister, Sayyid Abbas Argashi, what he's saying is that we will consider only on one condition, and that condition is that the negotiations will be on an equal footing, something we are not willing to do. And the evidence for that is what you stated when Donald Trump used the sort of threaten other countries, even though he wants to negotiate with them. Who's going to want to negotiate with you? Second thing is, what makes us think that the Iranians going to agree to this given what we did to them in 2018 after we unilaterally pulled out of the GCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, unilaterally breaking any law, any violation for international law, and breaking the protocol of sort of not upholding our end to the bargain. Let alone, we didn't even care for what other countries, the signatories that they were, the P5+1, the members of the UN Security Council plus Germany, we didn't even care what they think. We didn't even consult with them. Where the problem now for Mr. Trump, despite what you hear, and I want your audience to get this, despite the rhetoric you hear, Mr. Trump is thinking is dealing with Iran militarily a risky venture. That's what he's worried about. Why? It's because he wanted to include in the negotiations, should they move forward, the missile technology, which Iran says it's off limits. We'll talk about the nuclear file, but not the missiles. Why is this? Am I bringing this up? It's because Iran just tested the 4th generation of the Khyber ICBM. Khyber ICBM has a long range of about 2,000 kilometers, which means what? It can reach any facility within the Middle East where the US is hosted, has its troops. So Israel at the same time is concerned about this. That's why Israel cannot attack Iran by itself, and it won't. Same, the US will not do that. And that's one of the concerns. Hypersonic missile? They do. Iran has that. They developed that also. And by the way, the head of the strategic command in the Pentagon confirmed that we have nothing against that. So if Iran developed that, which I am sure the technology was shared from the Russians have even a far advanced hypersonic. The Chinese do. And this is why, if you go back, Wilmer, I'm sure, and I believe you and I, we talked about this back then, when the United States made the decision to remove the aircraft carrier from the Red Sea. Why do you think that was? Even though the Pentagon was saying, oh, it's for maintenance. It wasn't about maintenance. They got a word that the Houthis are in possession of some advanced missile. And the last point I want to mention into all this, if I may, it has to do with the recent naval drills that just been conducted about 5 days ago, between Russia, China, and Iran. It's called the Belt 25 security. Now, if you go back to last year and the year before, all those naval drills were about what? Were about hostage rescue missions. That's all. This one is different. Why? Because the Chinese are sending an advanced O-252 destroyer, which has ballistic missiles in it. The Russians are sending some advance, have sent some advance into these exercises, and the Iranians were using the Corvette missiles, which the Corvette vessels, which those are the equivalency of destroyers, but on a short form. The point is, they are sending a message that should you, meaning the United States, decide to embark on this insane venture of military, we will come to the support of Iran one way or another.
Isn't another reason why the U.S. backed the carrier out of the Red Sea was because they got a warning, not a threat, but a warning from Putin saying, you know, we can sink it with Kinjals from the Black Sea.
The Kinzhals, most of us here know. I mean, the military people, we know a little bit what's the really the advance of Kinzhal is, and that that will sink in a destroyer. And if Putin said that, that shows you just how much he is more concerned about the international security and stability more so than anything else.
So one of the things we haven't heard a lot about over the last month or two are Ansar Allah. And it seems as though they're just, well, no, you know what, before I get there, let me ask this question. Before I get there, let me ask this. Is the United States, is the West, as it relates to Iran, are they confusing restraint with fear? are they misinterpreting Iran's scaled back responses to Israeli aggression? Are they misinterpreting that as Iran's restraint is fear as opposed to strategic? Does that question make sense?
Well, yeah, the short answer is yes. They are thinking, well, Iran will not be in a position to respond or not willing to respond. But that is not true. And I'll say the same case about China. We are thinking that China is not responding because they are whatever. No, we are mistaken because we are misinterpreting, like you said, Wilmer, that's restraint for weakness. The concern in Iran, inside Iran, is that it's like every other country. You have elements inside the country, in the government, that will oppose certain policies. For the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, we'll have to think in terms of the domestic stability. That is one of the key. That
the
is going to have
on the economy.
That's of course it's important to them. So to them, they're saying, is it worth just to take our revenge and fire whatever on Israel for the amount of destruction, or is it for us to take a step back, assess and evaluate, and strike when the least expected? So, and my opinion personally is Iran does not want to take a risk at this time. That does not mean will not be able to defend its interest or its country if attacked by either Israel or the US. That is my assessment into this, because Iran will not be the only entity fighting the Americans or the Israelis. You're talking about major groups in the Middle East that Iran has invested in since 1979. All that investment is going to come to bear fruition by just focusing on U.S. installations in the region. So you're absolutely correct, Wilmer, that Washington, D.C. is misinterpreting this restraint for weakness.
I also think that same confusion or misunderstanding applied to Russia's initial response in Ukraine. I think that two things one thing about both President Xi and Putin, they're not going to be baited into any type of knee-jerk reaction. These gentlemen know history. They clearly understand diplomacy, and they're not going to fall for the banana, as I always say, the banana in the tailpipe trick. They will respond on their terms, on their timeline, and Putin was not going to just jump into Ukraine in a full-scale conflict. To your point, there were factions in his own country and politics that he had to think through. There were economics because when you get into a conflict like that can decimate your economy. And when your economy gets decimated, look at what's happening here. People start to turn on their government. So this was a very, very complex formula that had to be addressed. The same thing that we're just talking about Iran applies. The same thing applies to Russia.
Well, the same regarding Russia, just to highlight to you, this morning I had a chance to read the report that was released by, actually it's not released. It's it's a leak from the intelligence community. And the leak argued that Putin, that's what the report is saying, which to me it's a leak. It's not that Putin will not relinquish control over Ukraine. See where the misleading information is? That's to maneuver. This is why a lot of people, and that takes me back to your earlier point, Wilmer, about education, the critical thinking that we don't have anymore. This is part of that, because they are misleading the masses. I will say, compare this to what we did prior to the invasion of Iraq. We said the same thing about weapon of mass destruction. The intelligence report suggests, and that's usually where this misleading aspect. here is the thing regarding Russia that I believe where things is going to be headed moving forward. Of course, now the talks that just took place in Riyadh between our Secretary of State and a delegation from Ukraine, it wasn't about negotiations. It was about giving marching orders to Ukraine. You either toe the line or else, because the Europeans now are finding out that without the US support, they won't be able to manage it. Ukraine came to that conclusion way back, but the orders were about the ceasefire per se. To their surprise, meaning to the Ukraine surprise and to the American surprise, the Russian president put his own conditions regarding the ceasefire. And that tells me personally, he's not willing to just go along with whatever the Americans are saying. And also it tells me that he understands that the Ukrainian forces is about to be decimated completely soon. That is his reason for why. Putin is a very shrewd person. He's been around the block. He understands those dynamics. And to him, dealing with Trump, he understands the personality. But the way I see it is the Europeans that's going to be holding the end of the stick moving forward.
Well, two things. One, I'm glad you brought up that point, because what a lot of people in the West don't understand, Marco Rubio trying to have a conversation with Foreign Minister Lavrov, that's a pea shooter at a gunfight. That's a third grader talking to a college professor about nuclear physics. No. Lil Marco talking to Wang Yi from China. No, these people are professional diplomats. In fact, have you seen that recent interview with Lavrov?
Actually, I did, with Larry and Judge.
Yeah,
I did.
Napolitano. Yeah, but not. First of all, what did it mean anything to you that interview was in English?
Well, it means a lot.
Well, explain why. That Lavrov spoke in very clear English.
Fluent English, and even the terminology he used, Wilmer, those are some high-end academic terminology. I listened to it. I was very impressed. Very impressed. Now, you're absolutely correct. He's a statesman. So is Mr. Wang Yi. And those guys, they've been around long enough to know. For us, we have amateurs, like I always say, Marco Rubio or whomever, Tony Blaine or whomever.
Right.
Those are not. Because we kind of have not invested in building, really in building the next generation of diplomats. It's because you have now even Rubio himself, and I will challenge him to his face. I mean, I met him personally. I was supposed to assist him with one event back then, and he backed down. So it's like, ain't my business. What I see the problem is with Marco is that he flipped quickly. If you go back on a record of the Foreign Relations Committee,
right,
how hawk he was on the Russians,
and
all of a sudden, and that tells me, so where do you stand? Where do you stand? All of a sudden, and that again marks that point.
He's championing ideas and policies that he personally is against. To your point. And he's on the record. He's sitting there with Wang Yi. He's sitting there with Sergei Lavrov, and he's articulating positions that both of them know. Dude, you don't believe this. You want me to believe it, and you don't believe it.
That's true.
No,
that's
true. I've been telling folks they need to listen to that interview. He gives analysis. He starts talking about the analysis of American identity politics and he goes into some very deep stuff.
Yeah, no, it was highly informative, and I was I'm glad that, as a matter of fact, I was supposed to have Larry that day, but he reached out to me and let me know that he couldn't make it. What I found very interesting about that, Wilmer, if I may share this with you and your audience, is that when Lavrov mentioned about 1972, why 1972? Because it's crucial era, And to me, I fall back to the point of what if? What if at that time the Soviet Union, the Chinese, and the Americans sat down at the table, all three? We will have a different outcome, geopolitical outcome than we are witnessing today. But we didn't want to. We choose not to. Of course, at that time, as you know, Brzezinski was pushing for that narrative that the Russians, the Soviet Union, which led to where we are today, and pulling in all the other Eastern Europeans and so forth. And that is where I see the big problem that now we are trying to replicate in the Far East. Because here is the thing, and mark my word on this, what I see over the horizon is that when the dust settles on this Ukrainian conflict in any form or shape, even including a frozen conflict, some of the resources will be allocated to the Far East, because South China Sea is in our sights, where the conflict is going to be. And the way to know this, look at the two main events in Philippines and Australia. And that will give you an idea as to where things are moving. So the Chinese are aware of it. And yes, when Rubio sits with Mr. Wang Yi is thinking in the back of his mind, of his head, like, okay, well, let's just listen to this amateur and give him the, the protocol and move on.
Well, and speak to, because I think a lot of people aren't grasping, why is Donald Trump so hell-bent on ending the conflict in Ukraine? And the answer that I see is because he wants to shift the focus to China.
Indeed. And I agree, Wilmer, because it became clear. It became clear because when you consider who is in the administration, just take a look and see who is there. They all are Chinese hawks, including Rubio, who still maintain the same position he had against the Russians, except now he softened his tone, but he maintained the same one on the Chinese, to the point that the State Department has removed the PRC from the name officially. You don't call it People's Republic of China anymore. Why would you do that? That's been on the record forever, and we signed the 3 communiques recognizing the authority and the sovereignty of China mainland over Taiwan. Simple as that. So they come in like almost, as we say, changing the horses in the middle of the race. Just doesn't make sense. But it does make sense if you are to think about where the next conflict is going to be.
You mentioned the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, and there was a piece today, I think, in Axios. Trump asks Putin to spare, quote unquote, surrounded Ukrainian troops amid ceasefire push. He said today, Trump, he strongly requested that Russian President Putin spare the lives of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers whom he claimed were surrounded in the Kursk region in Russia. And this goes back to one of my earlier points. Folks don't understand how calculated how calculating President Putin is. And this has been a long, slow, methodical process. And because he doesn't want to go to Kyiv if he doesn't have to, he's been trying to extract his pound of flesh, trying to get the United States to cry uncle. And and so long as the United States won't cry uncle, he just keeps methodically moving forward. Your thoughts, Dr. Oualaalou?
Well, that's why he's known for as a sort of a geopolitical chess player. He's always a step ahead, and this goes way back to his background when he was in East Germany at part of the KGB at the time. And you learn over time. I mean, decades and decades of experience, it becomes evident during your decisions, I mean, I'll be honest saying this, Russians are lucky to have someone like that. I mean it. Besides, I'm not in for Russia, whatever. That's not the point.
Right.
The point is a qualified leader. I wish we have someone who is qualified. So where I see the issue, Wilmer, moving forward is that the Russian President Vladimir Putin, he is not going to want to take chance if he responded to Trump with this request. But on the other hand, Europeans will go ahead and send sort of the what we call them, the support troops. Those are for safekeeping troops, whatever. He made it clear that if the European troops are on Ukraine soil, they become legitimate targets.
They are
targets. Rightly so. And rightly so. If I were to advise Mr. Putin, and I would say that's what's need to be done, because otherwise they're not going to get the message.
But so I've asked this question to a number of people. In fact, I asked Ray McGovern this question yesterday. Why is Europe so hell-bent on following the United States down this rabbit hole? After the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, after the United States used Ukraine as its proxy, and we're watching Ukraine get decimated, the European elite, they still want this fight. Why?
Well, there's a lot of behind the scenes politics that's going on into all this, and the decisions is not even from the European leaders themselves. This coming from very influential entities within the United States that have a control over the transatlantic relations. We dictate the terms. You saw who was in the White House yesterday, the Secretary of NATO. Why do you think we even supported Mark Rutte to that position? Because we made it clear, well, you're going to follow the policies. We're going to dictate to you, no questions asked. So Europeans are in no different position than that, including the Brits, despite what you hear. What the Brits have done last week by conducting so-called summit in London, that's nothing but a facade. The Brits will do what we dictate to them. France now saying we will be willing to expand the nuclear umbrella to the rest of Europe. Do you think, in your opinion, Welmer, the French can afford it? No, they can't.
Well, in fact, during Lavrov's interview, I think he laughed and said, they got 3 bombs.
I know. They can't do it. They won't be able to afford it. And if I am to say, if Mr. Trump talks about this ending the conflict, then show leadership. And how would you show leadership? Is by pulling our troops out of Germany and maybe even NATO altogether. So if you say we're spending too much, talk is one thing, action is another. As the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius used to say, watch what a man says, not what he does. Watch what a man does, not what he says. It's the same thing. If we are to say we want to end the conflict, start by the basics. And the basics is, without the US, NATO ceases to exist, because NATO is the US.
And to that point, and as we move to wrap up, to that point, there's been so much conversation in the West about what President Putin's objectives are. Oh, he wants to reunite the Soviet Union. No. He wants to take over Europe. No. You know, if you listen to some people, oh, he's going to wind up in Cleveland. I mean, and you know, when Joe Biden was saying, we know Putin wants this, we know Putin wants that, never offering any evidence to support that assertion. I've never heard Vladimir. I've listened to a lot of his speeches. I don't speak Russian, but I do read the transcripts. I've read a lot of his speeches. He's never indicated anything like that. Yeah. So to your point, you watch what he says and you watch what he does. But so are the Europeans reading their own press clippings? That's the point I'm getting to. Are the Europeans reading and believing their own press clippings?
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I am very certain of, since I was a kid, I used to hear about Europe is gonna establish its own security apparatus. It's gonna stand on its feet, stay away from America as far as following its policy. Since I was a kid, I'm in my late 50s. So I'm still hearing the same argument. I will be going to Europe soon, and I am going to be looking at certain aspects as to where things. But there is no way they can't do it.
So here's my final question. Because I know you have family and you have a lot of contacts in Europe. How is this Ukrainian conflict and how Donald Trump appears to be trying to resolve it? How is that playing on the ground with the average European?
Well, the average European citizen wants that to end, and if the American president will do it, then be it, because it benefits them, the citizens. It's the leadership that doesn't want that. It's because they don't want only the Americans claim that it was the US that resolved the issue. Well, do you think that the Russian president is going to negotiate with the Europeans? Because they're useless. They're going to have to follow what the US is saying. Putin understands this reality far more than anyone else. If there were to be any negotiations, it's going to be with the Americans, because we dictate the term to the European, no matter what they say.
So so Donald Trump likes to put it in the context of negotiating a peace deal. Are they really negotiating? Are they negotiating the terms of surrender?
Well, yeah, when we hear about this peace deal, we need to understand that the Europeans is not going to be part of that. Ukraine in itself will not be part of that. It will be the deal between the Americans and the Russians. And in my opinion, is that some sort of a deal will be struck between the two, between Putin and Trump. How it's going to be, of course, it's not going to be like back then when you have to divide the territories into East and West. We're not going to be seeing that for simple reason, because the world is moving into a different set of order that is a more multipolar one. Because if they were to be the case, then we would have accepted the Chinese offer for ending the Ukraine-Russian war. But the Americans will not accept that one, because we don't want that to come from any other entity but the Americans, because we still hold the keys to the outcome.
Well, also, I think there's another reality that the folks in the West don't want to accept, and that, from what I can interpret from Putin, is that, look, the time for me to have conceded territory has passed. I asked you guys to cry uncle, and you wouldn't. You forced me to keep moving forward. And now that I've moved forward and I've liberated the Donetsk region, I'm protecting the ethnic Russians that were being ethnically cleansed by the Nazis in Ukraine. I'm not going to turn back on that, because it cost me too much to get here.
For sure. And I argued this way back at the beginning. Once it became clear that the Russians are going to take over these territories, there is no way they're going to. Why would they do that? Why would they give it back, no matter what?
How could he explain that to his own people? How could President Putin go back to the Russian people and say, well, I spent all this money, we lost all these lives, we claimed all this territory, and I gave it all back.
And I give it back. Yeah, no way. No way. No way. No way.
Dr. David Oualaalou, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that. And folks, if you're not watching Geopolitical Trends, and I know a lot of people that watch this show do, but to those that aren't watching Geopolitical Trends, you're missing out on phenomenal information. Dr. David Oualaalou, my dear friend, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. We need you all to hit that subscribe button. We truly need you. In order for us to continue down this path, we need you to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned. New episode on Monday. And now I'm trying to remember. Oh, I think my guest is Scott. I think Scott Ritter is going to join us on Monday. Yeah, I think Scott Ritter is joining us on Monday. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. You can find us on social media. All the links are below in the description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Have a wonderful weekend. I got grades to go turn in. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed weekend. See y'all next week. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.